Hello and welcome to today's virtual roundtable discussion, where we will be talking about what's driving Caribbean supply chains in today's market. My name is Whitney Ennis. I am the Vice President of Marketing here at Trailer Bridge, and I'm joined by two of my friends and industry professionals, Jacob Bingen, Vice President of Caribbean for Trailer Bridge, and Alberto Cabrera, Director of Business Development with JAXPort. Thank you guys for being with me today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks.
Yeah, I know that we are looking forward to a really robust conversation. So I want to get started with for our audience, but I want to let them know first. If you have questions for Jacob or Alberto, please feel free to drop them into the chat and we will get to those throughout the conversation or at the end. But guys, I do have a list of questions for both of you. So let's get started. We've seen a lot of development and investment around manufacturing within the Caribbean market, especially as we've come out of the COVID-19 pandemic and the disruptions that were created through that. So I'm curious to know what trends you're seeing as manufacturers and distributors look to really reevaluate their supply chain and look to bring product closer to the US. And Jacob, if I could start with you, because I know there's a lot of investment happening on the island right now.
Sure. So yeah, Puerto Rico years ago, 15, 20 years ago, was really known for its pharmaceutical manufacturing and the industry of basically that area. And now it's coming back. You see plants that are investing again in the pharmaceutical area. You've got, plants like Amgen, CooperVision, Vercellus, AbbVie that basically are investing money, growing their facilities, hiring more people. And that's a great sign for Puerto Rico. It's a great thing for the economy. We certainly look forward to having more of that in the next few years. So I think that's a really big step in the future for that.
And what we talk about a lot is what Puerto Rico has to offer. We are also seeing manufacturing come in the DR, but Puerto Rico has a really strong workforce, which is key to attracting manufacturing. And that's something that we've talked about a lot. Alberto, when we were prepping for this conversation, you had mentioned some of the relationships that JAXPort has in the island and how you're working to support attracting manufacturing. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, in the last 10 to 15 years, we've partnered up with the Puerto Rico Manufacturers Association, helping them promote bringing back manufacturing to the island. And I think one of the things that we've worked together with this group is to, especially after COVID, we were all talking about supply chain integrities. That was a big buzz throughout COVID-19. We saw certain lanes that the rates dramatically increased. Puerto Rico's rates remained stable, and we also had a secured supply chain that has been there for a very long time, which helped strengthen the case for bringing back manufacturing to Puerto Rico. The 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 all of the carriers going back and forth to Puerto Rico have been doing it for many years, safely, securely, which is something I think that would add value to bringing back manufacturing to Puerto Rico. So we partnered with them. We are a champion for that organization, which hopefully brings more cargo, northbound cargo, which we would love to see. I think that's my biggest goal is to see more northbound cargo coming back. Helps all of us in the trade lane, including the Port Authority, and uh, more importantly, the entire island of Puerto Rico. I think that is a big plus when we start seeing jobs again there.
Absolutely. Alberto, just to add to what you're saying, I mean, when you look at the island of Puerto Rico and you look at the service being provided by the Jones Act carriers that do supply the island, there's 7 sailings a week that come into Puerto Rico. That level of service is not seen anywhere in the Caribbean. Um, you have vessels coming in on a Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. It's continuous and it's consistent and it's reliable, and that's a big plus. And then going on to what you said with the northbound, and this is something a lot of people don't know and manufacturers, really need to get a hold of is it's actually more cost effective to ship a container from San Juan, Puerto Rico to Jacksonville, Florida than it is from New Jersey to Jacksonville, Florida. So there's a
Mhm.
really cost effective way for manufacturers to get their product off the island. The service, the Jones Act carriers are dedicated to the Jacksonville, basically the Jacksonville San Juan lane. So your cargo also arrives back in Jacksonville within 2 to 4 days, 5 days max, which is great service, um, and at a very cost effective price.
Well, I think this is a great time for us to really look at and talk about the Jones Act. So if someone is not familiar with that term or not familiar with how that plays into the Puerto Rican supply chain, I think it's important that we kind of take a step back and explain that. And there's a lot of misconceptions around the Jones Act. And so, Jacob, could you explain the Jones Act, and then can we dive a little bit into some of the
Sure.
misconceptions and what people are seeing?
Yeah. So basically, the Jones Act, and I'll try to keep it as simple as possible, has three main points. One, the vessel has to be a U.S. flag vessel. Two, the shipment has to be from one U.S. port to another U.S. port. And three, the crew on the vessel has to be U.S. Basically U.S. citizens. So those are the 3 main points of the Jones Act. And the cabotage laws exist in 85% of the countries around the world. But for Puerto Rico, what it does, it provides a very quick and reliable service from Jacksonville to San Juan and back to Jacksonville. Um, and it's cost effective. And I think going back to what Alberto said, during COVID, international rates went up 300, 400, 500%. Um, and rates with the Jones Act carriers stayed fairly consistent. I think, there might have been a 2%, 3% increase in regards to fuel or something like that. But and it allows manufacturing on the island. It allows customers, consignees on the island to basically plan and have a budget that allows them to budget their products and be able to receive them cost effectively. And that's important for the growth of the island, for manufacturing on the island. Um, and it's a huge plus to have that.
Now,
But
Alberta,
I'd like to add a little bit to that from the Port Authority perspective. We understand the Puerto Rico trade. This is what got Jacksport to where it is today. It was the origins of Jacksport was a Puerto Rico trade, but we also dearly understand the amount of investment that it takes from our carriers to be in this trade lane. It's not cheap to be in this trade lane. we understand the investment that's taken by our carriers to stay in this trade lane. So we respond accordingly by making sure that we meet your needs as a carrier here. So that, 7 sailings a week, we want to get you in and out of here. We want our channels to be right depth, free and clear for you guys to come in, no congestion at the berth. So it's equally important to us. But for many, many years, people are like, I don't understand the Jones Act. I don't, a lot of people didn't understand our industry, period, until COVID hit. They didn't understand trains. They didn't understand trucks. And I'm not saying didn't understand. They really didn't get a grasp of it until it became very difficult to move a load, very expensive to move a load. And the Puerto Rico trade just kept moving right along. And it was an eye-opening experience. It's one of those things that you've been preaching your entire career, and it actually happened. You actually got to see it at work, which was extremely refreshing. Kind of almost validating your speeches from 10 years ago. So, anyways,
Alberto, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, before I forget, you asked about misconceptions, Whitney, and one of the big misconceptions is that only U.S. flag carriers can come into Puerto Rico. And that's actually not true. We have international carriers that come here all the time. And actually, international cargo is 60% of the cargo of the vessels that come into Puerto Rico. So we have, all the international vessels, Maersk, CMA, CGM, Evergreen, they all dock in Puerto Rico and San Juan. It's just they don't come from a U.S. port. They're coming from Panama. They're coming from Spain. They're coming from South America. They're coming directly from Europe. They're coming from Mexico. So there are international carriers that dock here. It's just the service of the Jones Act carriers is that much more consistent and reliable.
Well, it's really looking at the end user, right? Manufacturers want their product to be close to the end user. And we see this growing population base within the US, especially within the Southeast. And so when you bring your cargo right into Jacksonville, you have really quick access to a majority of the US population, and you have a lot of logistics options to get it to where it needs to be, whether you're looking at intermodal on the rail, or if you're trying to truck it into Georgia or some of the other neighboring states. And I think that's what makes the Jones Act unique. Obviously, here in Jacksonville, we're very familiar with that. We have 3 Jones Act carriers that are sailing from Jacksonville to San Juan and back. We're all competitors, but we're certainly friendly fire, because at the end of the day, it's about supporting the people of Puerto Rico. And that's really what all of us are working for and towards, whether we are a carrier or from the port's perspective. What I find interesting about having this discussion with the two of you is both of you have really unique and colorful backgrounds in the industry. Alberto, you've been in the trade lane, you've been in Puerto Rico trade lane from a carrier perspective, selling and supporting shippers. Jacob, you've been on the international side as well. So you understand both sides of a manufacturer's supply chain, because certainly manufacturers are not only bringing freight in from the US, like you said, Jacob, they're bringing them in from international places too.
Right.
And then shipping things into the US. So it's important to understand the full supply chain and how it all works together versus just one element of it. So great color and great background on the Jones Act. I think it's important for us to understand that as we move forward into the conversation. And we're talking a lot about Puerto Rico, but the DR is certainly a piece of this conversation, and the manufacturing that is happening there. I think we see a lot of pharmaceuticals and medical manufacturing. Jacob, are there any other trends that you're seeing maybe in the DR that you see coming through?
Yeah, the DR is very interesting. Years and years ago, it's grown a lot. It's developed. The ports have developed. They've improved their infrastructure on the island there in the Dominican Republic. The DR they also import and export almost 1-to-1. So for every container that comes in, they're exporting a container. So they have a very balanced kind of trade. Puerto Rico, unfortunately, right now is probably around 4 to 1. So for every 4 containers that come in, one goes out full. The DR has taken advantage of the fact that they have those vessels coming in with a lot of cargo materials for manufacturing. I mean, there's manufacturing in numerous areas in the Dominican Republic, plastic manufacturing, there's clothing, there's industry, there's metals. It's in industrial manufacturing there is just grown so much in the DR, and they've done a really good job with it. And the government, I think, there has also realized that the ports, they've expanded all their ports there in the capital significantly, and there's incredible volume that goes through those ports.
Well, you bring up a good point, infrastructure. And this is on our list of questions, but I'd like to kind of bring it to the front since we're on that topic. When we think about manufacturing in Puerto Rico and what supply chain needs and what will support growth in manufacturing or support growth on the island, infrastructure is a big piece of that conversation. Certainly, there's investment in port infrastructure on both sides of the equation, but there's infrastructure that needs to happen on the island. Could either of you weigh in a little bit on that, of what we need to see or what is currently happening to secure and support growth in that market?
Alberto, you want to go?
Yeah, let me take a stab at that first. So here in Jacksonville, like I said, Jacksport. We are very focused on this trade lane. So we've made some recent investments into some infrastructure as far as cranes, and also rebuilding our berths. And we're not done yet. We're still working on rebuilding some of these berths. We wanted to align with the Puerto Rico Port Authority. We run separately and independently and completely separately, but we have in the past 7 years made huge strides to work together, and we've actually kind of married up our leases to make sure that this trade lane stays protected. So we don't have any lapses between either one of the port authorities. That's a very comforting situation because it was like a vicious circle. My lease is up here and not there, and so it seems to be neutralized. So from the we will continue. I'm thinking of I think our next project will be a dock rebuild at your facility. So that's all this infrastructure and capital improvements are, it's a very long process. There's a lot of studies, engineering that goes in prior to digging the hole and pouring the cement.
Yeah.
So we feel we understand what's going on in Puerto Rico when you guys talk about a power grid or a pipe or waters, or we understand it's a long lead. I believe you guys are working on a dock rebuild. Jacob, you'll probably get into that. From my younger days, I remember working on those docks, and it's finally now seeing some light at the end of the tunnel. I won't steal your thunder, but I'd love to hear where you guys are at with that infrastructure improvement.
Yeah. So thanks, Alberto. So Trailer Bridge operates out of the Army terminal. We have our ramp there for our ro-ro barge, and we have our finger pier. Unfortunately, the finger pier years ago was deemed by the Coast Guard inoperable or condemned. 2 years ago, there was a federal grant that was given to basically rebuild that and reconstruct that. That's moving along, actually, surprisingly enough, much quicker than we thought it was, which is great news. It's probably about 35, almost 40% done in terms of approvals. The design phase is completed. They're now looking at presenting that to the Army Corps of Engineers for their approval. And once that's done, then obviously they're looking at a company that's going to be able to tear down what is there existing and rebuild. And again, that's not something that's going to happen in a year or two, but it'll probably happen in 3 or 4 years. So, something that I thought maybe was going to take 8 or 10 years probably is going to be done in the next 3 or 4, which is great news. I mean, the Port of San Juan needs that space. It's going to make our operation a lot more efficient. And it's going to help Puerto Rico continue to be able to grow. And in terms of, the other infrastructures on the island, obviously the electrical grid and the water, that's tough. I think it's an issue that is going to take probably certainly 5 to 8 years to rebuild and make it and get it up to levels that it needs to be at. But it's being worked on. Maybe not as quickly as we'd like, but it is being worked on, and hopefully, that once that improves, then you'll see a lot more manufacturing be able to come to the island and take advantage of that. Because the service in terms of getting cargo here is there. There is not an issue of getting, and the best example of that, and I might be jumping around a little bit here, but the best example of that was after Maria. We docked 2 days after the hurricane, and we brought in medical supplies, water, food. The fact that some of the roads were blocked off and some of the warehouses weren't able to accept the cargo because there were damages. But from the ocean perspective, from the ocean transport perspective, from the carrier perspective, cargo was getting to the island, and it was getting here quickly. So that's always a good thing.
Well, I know that's really personal for you, Jacob, being you live on the island, you're a part of the everyday impacts of how cargo moves and how freight gets there and ends up on a store shelf for a family to be able to use. I think one of the key points for me that's really important about that conversation around infrastructure is the forward thinking thought process that all of the players have, right? From a port authority perspective, from a carrier perspective, from a government perspective, where they're looking and investing in the infrastructure to ensure that we're there for decades to come. I know that for Trailer Bridge, it was very important, and it was a milestone and really a historical moment for us when both of our leases were aligned in Puerto Rico and in Jacksonville. And so that takes real partnership. It takes real forward thinking on behalf of everybody that's at the table. And so that talks and that speaks to the commitment of everybody involved. And that's not just happening here at Trailer Bridge. It's happening across the board when we look at the Jones Act carriers and those who are serving the island, which I think is really important as we look forward. You mentioned Hurricane Maria, and I think that that's one of the elements that makes this supply chain a little bit complex, is that we have a hurricane season that kind of throws a wrench in things sometimes. And so I want to kind of take the conversation to a place of when we think about it from a manufacturer distributor's perspective, if they are considering moving into this market and using the Jones Act trade, what are some of the complexities that they may face? And what are some strategies or things that they should know whenever they look to come into the market and build a supply chain using a Jones Act carrier?
I'll jump in here quickly because of the fact that I work in this on a daily basis. I think it goes back to what we talked about earlier. The arrivals of the Jones Act carriers on the island are Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. So you can very easily program your cargo to arrive 4 times a week, and consistently and on multiple days, multiple times. So with multiple carriers. So you can spread out your inventory over a week. You don't have to receive everything on a Monday or everything on a Friday. You can spread that out. So if you're getting 10, 12 containers on a weekly basis, you can receive 2 on a Monday, 2 on a Tuesday, 3 on Thursday, and 1 more on Friday, or however you want to break that up. It allows you to reduce your cost. It allows for better control of your inventories, reduces your demurrage. So there's a numerous benefits from that, really.
You couldn't have said it better, Jacob. That's exactly from my years long ago in the trade. Plan accordingly. We do have 7 sailings a week. At a very early age, we would get these phone calls. I was in operations, and of course, it's usually from a salesperson saying, "Hey, if you don't load this box, the plant's going to shut down." And could be possible. Things happen. totally understand. But then it turned into a weekly occurrence where somebody was going to shut down if we didn't get this load on there. And I would think to myself, if I didn't fuel in the top loaders or fuel in the trucks to unload the barge, then we wouldn't be able to unload the barge. So plan ahead, plan accordingly. It is a long supply chain, and I call it long and wide. So you got a lot of room in that supply chain to plan accordingly for manufacturing. I think it's sometimes I would call it the floating warehouse. We've called it that before. I knew car dealers that would put cars on the water. They weren't even paid for yet, and until they landed, they made that transaction. So you got time and you got room to wiggle in this trade lane, which I think makes this whole concept of either you're manufacturing in Puerto Rico or you're exporting back into the States. I think it's a wonderful thing because once again, the service is there. It's, 3 different carriers, 3 different sailings. You could spread it out. So your answer was spot on. It's something that I've thought about for many, many years. It's a really neat opportunity. You can't do that in pretty much any other trade line.
And if you look at the people also in Puerto Rico, and I go back to, I was fortunate enough to grow up on the island here. 25, 30 years ago, the manufacturing, the pharmaceutical manufacturing on the island was incredible. I mean, you probably had and I'm throwing a number out there, but probably about 22, 24 facilities, multiple facilities of Johnson & Johnson, Baxter, Merck, Upjohn, Pfizer. They were all here. Now it's reduced a little bit, but there's still quite a bit of manufacturing. But what remains is the people that worked in those industries are still around. So you can easily open up a pharmaceutical and you have people with the brain trust and the brain knowledge that can run it and do a great job doing it. And I think that's one of the big advantages of Puerto Rico right now versus someone else, right? Where people are trained, they have worked in that industry and are able to you can basically start that up and have the people that know what they're doing.
I mean, workforce is so important in any market. Whenever you're trying to bring a facility in, it's, I think, one of the key drivers for decision making is, do I have the talent? Do I have the expertise in the market to be able to staff and to have that workforce to be able to get an operation off the ground and running? From other
especially now,
for sure. What about the other complexities? I mean, are there others that people may not see in an international lane? I mean, an international lane certainly has its own list of complexities, but from the Caribbean market in particular, are there other things that people should be aware of or consider?
One thing I'd like to point out is we all of us here on this screen know of the relationships that are built around our trade lane. And there's a lot of supporting groups that we rely on for freight, we rely on for transportation, warehousing. Many companies out here that participate in this whole supply chain as well. They have an end-to-end situation, a solution. I mean, end-to-end solution. They have one here in the States, some of them here in Jacksonville, spread out through all the United States, and then in Puerto Rico. And again, using that reliable service to Puerto Rico, the 7 sailings a week. So, I think people that are thinking of starting manufacturing or exploring that opportunity, that they could call a carrier and negotiate with a carrier to get their transportation needs done, or they could reach out to one of these providers that are providing 3PL logistics services and have pick up the phone, one phone call, and their problems are solved, which is, again, something that is very unique to the Puerto Rico trade. We have those experts in the field closely working with the people in the trade lane.
And so you don't have to know it all. You don't have to have all the answers. Because
Don't have to have all the answers. You could be a very busy manufacturer and you can make one phone call. It's not that, you just make it easy. There's a lot of people in this industry, in the trade lane, the Puerto Rico trade lane, that make it easy. I think somebody had a slogan once that said that, we make it easy. I don't remember who it was.
well, I know we make it happen. So
Yeah, you guys make it happen.
You know what? One area that we haven't touched on, and it's also really, really key, is the fact that the three carriers in the trade in Puerto Rico all use 53-foot equipment, which mirrors really 53-foot equipment in the States. International carriers, not for any other reason, it's always been that way. They use 40-footers. So if you're shipping volume, and if you're shipping a significant amount of it, if you have to move 10, 15, 40 footers, you can reduce that by 30% if you use 53. So it helps, obviously, in terms of cost. It helps the environment. You're not pulling 10 trucks, you're pulling 8 or 7. So it's that's a big plus also, because it really mirrors domestically the trucking industry in the US that moves everything on 53s pretty much.
yeah.
Great
And
point.
we've just talked about that in a recent blog, because I do think it's important for people to understand, because there are so many different options, and depending on where you're moving cargo, it may not necessarily be the first thing that you think of, but it's an element of this trade lane that can be unique and that can support a manufacturer's supply chain in a really efficient and cost-effective way. So we are coming on 30 minutes. The conversation has been so good, the time has flown by, but I do want to get to a couple questions. But you mentioned one thing, Alberto, and it was the relationships. It was the one phone call. That's something that we talked about in our prep call, was the ability to get an answer from a single point of contact, and how that can really help shape conversations. And the relationships, I think, are across the board and built on trust. I mean, Trailer Bridge can call Jacksport if we have a unique move that we need support on from the port's perspective. That type of relationship is certainly unique, and I think that that's something that can be used to a shipper's advantage, the relationships that we all have. And when we talk about unique cargo, we haven't really touched on it yet, but with our service, we have the RoRo that allows for overdimensional, oversized freight, which is going to be key in some of those infrastructure investments that we've talked about. And it was key whenever we looked at the Hurricane Maria, and the response to that was the bigger, the ability to move that equipment in a really quick and efficient way.
Yeah.
Certainly continue to see a lot of oversized equipment being moved, generators to support the electrical grid, et cetera. But as we look to wrap it up, I do want to remind our guests and our audience that if you have a question for the group, please feel free to drop that in the chat, and we'll try to get to that today. But I want to ask both of you, as we look ahead, there's certainly been some challenges this year and in this market. There are some challenges that are related to changes in consumer behavior that are tied to increased fuel and increased in just cost of life in general. But what opportunities and challenges do you expect will shape Puerto Rico and the Caribbean supply chain over the next 12 months?
I think one of the things, Whitney, is we're seeing a change in regards to purchasing in general. People are purchasing smarter. They're looking at products, whether it's for their consumption at home out of the supermarkets, that makes more sense. Some even not necessarily based on price. I mean, I think one of the funny anecdotes that I kind of have now is I see these high-end food items for dogs where it's this fresh, great food, and you put it in your fridge, or it's a high-end food, and so those kinds of things. And if vendors or suppliers know about that and realize that, they're jumping on that bandwagon and selling that. there's products in Puerto Rico that are a staple in the market, right? I mean, we live on rice and beans down here, so that's never going to end. It's always going to be there. Beef, proteins, those, so there's certain products that are always going to be there. But it's, I think the suppliers, the supermarket chains, they look at what is happening and they're able to adjust very, very quickly with trends and changes in the market.
Well, we had a discussion about this recently from the consumer study that Meta just put out around the changes that are being impacting the buyers in the supermarkets and how individuals and families are looking to spread their dollar. And so they are seeing an increase in proteins. Maybe there's a decrease in alcohol consumption because people are just using their dollars to feed their family because they're paying more to fill up at the tank. And that certainly impacts the type of freight that goes in the containers that goes to the island, because distributors have to kind of adjust that to support. Alberto, what opportunities or challenges do you see ahead?
Well, it's this trade lane's been around forever, and we've been working in it forever and analyzing it forever. And just when you think you got it figured out, you do not have it figured out. So when you look at the trends, and we look at different trends here at the Port Authority, because we have an array of cargoes. We do automotive, bulk, Asian container trade. When one's high, the other one's low. And when you start seeing interest rates go up, gas prices go up, everyone seems very concerned about Puerto Rico. And then you look at Puerto Rico's numbers, and they're not going gangbusters, but they're not diving either. So you start to wonder what is going on. And Jacob, you're like, hey, it's not like we've stopped spending. When you really think about it, if you stop spending or stop purchasing in Puerto Rico, we have a very big problem. Something is very off, because people eat, people have to go to work, people have to get clothes. We send all that. We send all that. We on this chat here are moving all of these products. So if we see a dive, there's a big problem. So it's, what are the challenges ahead? For me, it's I'm going to stick with the infrastructure in Puerto Rico, and how do we get that back online, and not that it's off. How do we improve that? And I think if we can prove to these manufacturers, like, we have a great supply of energy at a very reasonable cost, and a very skilled workforce, I think those are the things that we need to concentrate on to get these manufacturers back into Puerto Rico. I'm going to say it again from the beginning. I want to see the northbound cargo grow. Everybody here has heard this joke before, but the number one export out of Puerto Rico is air. I mean, we just ship empties back, and we need to fill those empties and put cargo in it. Every one of us will win with that. I can't stress it enough to everybody that's listening. Let's help bring back the manufacturing to Puerto Rico. I'm very fond of that.
Well, I think that the cost-effective option, like Jacob was talking about earlier, whenever you look at that northbound volume and that northbound availability from a capacity perspective, there's something there. And so I think that if we have a distributor or manufacturer that's listening, you need to call one of the carriers and have that conversation, preferably Trailer Bridge, to talk about how to help you with that northbound capacity, because it's there, and we have the opportunity to help and provide a unique supply chain solution when it comes to that. We do have a question for the two of you. I think that this is a really interesting one, because the Jones Act has got a ton of attention lately. And so thank you, Ian Cook, for this question. He says, I have seen a lot of Jones Act waiver activity in the JAX PR trade. If so, what impact has it had on pricing or operational constraints? The waiver that I believe we're talking about here is the waiver related to the current administration's goals to reduce fuel pricing. So who wants to take that one? I know this might be a little sensitive topic.
You want to start, Alberto?
I'm not even sure how to answer this question because I don't really know um, which carriers have gotten these waivers. I haven't seen any impact on pricing or operational constraints. Then again, so this one's a little over my head. I'd be very curious to know where Ian Cook works. Ian, um, uh,
Well, I do know that the waivers were more
yeah,
towards fuel and some of the agricultural project products, I believe, as well. But Jacob, could you weigh in here?
Yeah. So I think in the last 10 years, if my memory serves me correctly, there have been two instances of waivers, one now
okay,
recently and one I believe it was either after Hurricane Maria or during COVID. I think it was after Hurricane Maria. Um, and and at the time, I think there was a little misunderstanding in regards to granting the waivers. They thought, well, we need more cargo to be able to come to the island. It needs to get there quicker, etc. And the issue really wasn't more cargo getting to the island. The issue was actually getting the cargo to the end user, to the end person on the island. So, at one point in time after Hurricane Maria, we had almost 6,000 containers stacked at the port with food, water, etc.
right,
And the issue was the distribution on the island. It wasn't actually getting it to the island. The recent waiver, I think, has to do more with like LNG and fuel and
yeah, you're
the
right.
fact of getting a cheaper fuel to the island. Um, and again, I think there's one carrier that has requested or looked at actually shipping. I don't know if it's actually come into the island yet. Um, it's not the easiest thing to do because you have to have a setup here. You have to have someone to receive it. You can't just show up and say, "Hey, I came in with um 45 million gallons of diesel, and here you go." It's so it, it takes a little time, and I think it goes back to Alberto to what you said. The investment by the Jones Act carriers over the last
Right,
30 years on the island in terms of equipment, infrastructure, relationships with customers, and just building that confidence up over the years. You don't build it up over a week, showing up because there's a waiver, you deliver your cargo,
exactly,
and then you're gone. Um,
exactly. With these
so
carriers, your carriers have all of you guys have hard assets in the ground, and like I said, once again, that's not cheap. And then it's almost like um, like you said, come in at the very end and reap all the advantages here is you know I understand that there could be emergency situations, but it's never been a problem of getting something to the island. I have not seen that. So I'm a Jones Act guy, and I truly believe in it, and it's worked very, very well for my entire career. And
Yeah.
I have a
I
lot of
think what
good
would be
memories.
interesting, I think what would be interesting is after this period where the waiver, I think, was either 60 or 90 days. I'm not exactly sure how many actual vessels came in with fuel or LNG or in that period of time. And I would be very, very surprised if it's more than two or three.
I think the important thing here is for us to understand the importance of helping people look at the Jones Act with clarity, right? Because there are so many misconceptions about the Jones Act. And it's important for us to not only have conversations with our shippers, with our customers, with our industry partners, it's also important for us to have conversations with our local and state and federal administration so that they can understand because they're not in the trade with us and they don't see the day-to-day impacts of it. So that's why it's really important for us to have those conversations. And we're doing that. We're doing that from a individual company perspective. We're doing it in partnership with our port partners at Jacksport. We're going and we're having those conversations. And I think that's where real clarity can come out around the impact of the Jones Act, how it protects the people of Puerto Rico, but also what does a waiver really look like? Is there, truly an impact there, good or bad? And so I'm sure we're going to see some additional conversations come out in the coming months around that. Thank you for the question, Ian. But Alberta, did you have more?
Well, and when you said we need to get out there and talk to our constituents, I mean, this goes back to our trips to Washington, where we're making it aware to everybody. I think that was one thing that we've done here recently at the port, is to set up this trip and go report what we've seen to our constituents and say, hey, this is working, or this is not working, or we need help here and we need help there. I think it's moved the needle. It really has moved the needle. I mean, we keep needing to move the needle, and we will continue to do so, but I think it was a great step.
Yeah, because when you have understanding, you can have support for funding that's needed on the island for the infrastructure. So it's all a big cycle, and we're all working towards one common goal. And certainly this conversation went a lot towards Puerto Rico, but the Caribbean is a big market, a lot of opportunity. And while we are Jones Act carriers and we support Puerto Rico, we certainly, I think, across the board are supporting the entire Caribbean market from a port perspective, but also from a carrier perspective. So the future is bright. I know that we have to work through the tough times and kind of ebb and flow with the trends, but thank you guys so much for this conversation today. Jacob, Alberto, your expertise, I always learn something. I always walk away a better person. So thank you very much. Do you have any last final thoughts for us before we close out, or have you said it all? Mic drop.
I just want to thank everyone for taking the time to listen in. I know it's sometimes hard to break free, but I love talking about Puerto Rico. It is makes me getting up early in the morning easier every day, knowing that I'm working for the people on the island.
I love that.
Yeah, I'm going to use your phrase, Alberto. I couldn't have said it better myself. So, absolutely, it was a great conversation. I'm glad we got some of the key points out there, and hopefully people learned a little bit more about the service that's provided to the island, which is excellent, amazing service, really, that the island receives, both northbound and southbound. And hopefully the northbound, you can grow that manufacturing area, which is going to be great for everyone on the island. Creates more jobs, and gets cost-effective product made in the USA back to the US.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys again. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. If you have questions or you are interested in learning more about either JAXPort and the role that the Port Authority is playing in supporting the Caribbean market, or if you are looking for a provider, please feel free to connect with Jacob here at Trailer Bridge. We would love to be able to support you. You can find more information about our company at trailerbridge.com. And we have answered a lot of questions around the Jones Act, 53-foot containers on our blog, but there's also an opportunity for you to connect with us. We'd love to have a conversation. Thank you guys. Have a great rest of your week, and we will talk soon.
Take care. See ya.
Thank you. Bye-bye.